There is a path carved not in stone, but in suffering. A trail of blood, bone, and prayers whispered into the void. They say it leads to a place of divine rapture, a world once touched by the Emperor himself, sanctified by the death of a martyr saint whose name echoes like a dying hymn in the void. Yet no star chart holds its name, no astropath can reach its light, and those who return from the journey, if any ever do, come back altered in ways that make you wish they hadn't. This is the tale of a pilgrimage, ancient and sacred, yet rooted in nothing but dream and decay. Of a world erased or perhaps never real, worshipped by millions who walk toward oblivion with faith in their hearts and ashes on their tongues. This is not just a journey. It is a wound in the galaxy, bleeding belief and madness in equal measure. A path that ends not in salvation, but in silence. The beginning, as it is told in countless variant sermons and sacred pictographs, is drenched in ash and the blood of martyrdom. In the shadowy centuries following the age of apostasy, when the ecclesiarchy scrambled to recover its legitimacy and renew its grip upon the human soul, there emerged a figure cloaked in light and agony. Saint Doarissa the Veiled. Her story is as fractured as it is exalted. Some claim she was a low-born Medicae from a plague-ravaged agri-moon. Others whisper that she was a confessor exiled from Ophelia 7 for preaching compassion over judgment. What all versions agree upon is her end, one of sublime self-chosen obliteration. It is said Doarissa walked into the heart of an unnamable war, into a world already consumed by heresy and warp fire. The Imperium had abandoned it. The stars around it were fading. Yet she went alone, bearing only her staff, a book of torn scripture, and the skull of her predecessor. When Imperial forces returned decades later to reclaim the system, they found the world cleansed, blackened to bedrock, but free of corruption. In the very center of the blasted ruin, they unearthed a tomb untouched by fire, inscribed in every language of man with the words, "She did not beg, she became." That was the birth of the pilgrimage. It started as a shrine, a curiosity. But in the spiritual vacuum that followed Goga Van Dyer's purges and the breaking of many older saint cults, it became a magnet. Pilgrims began arriving, then dying, then vanishing. Those who returned spoke of visions, of a woman with her eyes bound in barbed gold, walking through fire that did not burn. The ecclesiarchy, eager to fill its churches and coffers, sanctified the site and officially canonized Doarissa. A path was drawn, linking holy sites she had never visited, constructing a mythic arc of suffering meant to replicate her lonely trek. And so, a trail of sanctified agony began to stretch across Segmentum Pacificus. Shrines hastily built on war-torn rocks, reliquaries placed on plague moons, entire void stations rebranded as moments in the saint's journey. The true world of her martyrdom was lost within a century. Some blamed navigational error. Others whispered of warp storms that wiped entire systems from memory. No matter. The path now ended in a place called Dolar's End, a planet that, by all records, did not exist. That did not matter either. For faith abhors simplicity. The less there is to see, the more there is to believe in. And as the centuries bled on, the tale of the veiled saint became a black artery through which hope, despair, and 1,000 fractured prayers flowed. Whole generations dedicated themselves to the walk, never expecting to arrive. They simply moved, like rusted gears in a broken watch, toward a destination that defied stars and sanity alike. The original texts surrounding Doarissa's life were quietly edited, blurred by the same hands that once preserved them. Some versions claimed she ascended to the Emperor's side in physical form. Others hinted she was taken by demons and converted, and that the pilgrimage was a test of moral fortitude against her whispering. Still others insisted there was never any Doarissa, only a symbolic anchor for some hidden ecclesiarchal program, a calculated creation meant to redirect heretical fervor. But all of that is ash in the wind compared to what the pilgrims believe. To them, she is the light between dying suns, the last kindness in a galaxy of knives. They do not question the silence at the journey's end. It is part of the miracle, part of the beauty. Her path began in fire, in a world that chose death over surrender. Why would her legacy end in anything less? So the root was born in contradiction, in the smoke between truth and necessity. A story painted over holes in the stars. And the faithful came, their faces cracked by vacuum and time, singing hymns to a woman who walked into a lie so perfect it became the only truth that mattered. To walk the path of the penitent is to abandon the very notion of comfort, purpose, or even linear time. It does not begin in a grand cathedral or end in any recorded system. It begins where despair does, in the belly of underhives, aboard radiation-scabbed void ships, in the minds of the dying who have nothing left but faith. The pilgrimage is not one trail but thousands, endlessly converging and fracturing again, dictated more by belief than by any logistical map. Still, there is a sequence, a spine of hallowed agony, known to the faithful as the 13 Stations of Dolar. Each station is a world or place scarred by history and reconsecrated by imperial decree. The first is often Desolacia Prime, a dead forge world with air that tastes of old oil and regret, where pilgrims lie face down for a full Terran day before boarding gravity-cursed transports that only fly once per decade. From there, they might drift to the ruins of Juno's Mercy, a hospice moon turned ossuary, its walls packed with the bones of previous walkers. There are steps carved into obsidian mountains on Morntide. There are ice-crusted monasteries staffed only by silent Sisters Repentia, whose presence alone makes the air ache with penance. The path is constructed to break. It is said that only through total collapse can one be remade in the image of Doarissa. Pilgrims are encouraged to discard everything: clothing, food, their own names. Many sew their mouths shut in reverence of the veiled saint's supposed final vow of silence. Others carry weights equal to their sins, sometimes dragging entire caskets filled with sand, ash, or memory shards. Death is expected. Martyrdom is celebrated. But worse than death is failure. To turn back, to speak doubt aloud, is to forfeit one's soul, and the galaxy does not spare them its own cruelties. The path crosses orc-held territories, drifts through the edges of eye-borne warp flares, even dips into zones once declared perdita by the Inquisition. Entire segments have vanished mid-pilgrimage, entire shrines swallowed by Xenos infestations or turned to chaos without the ecclesiarchy even noticing until centuries later. Still, the pilgrims press on. They walk through war zones, through asteroids raining fire, through warp-churned void currents where navigators go blind. No single map exists. Instead, pilgrims rely on relics. Bone slivers from earlier martyrs, encoded chants that activate when sung beside ancient Auspec's ruins, dreams believed to be sent by the Emperor. Some argue the path moves, that it is a living ritual, reshaping itself to remain just out of reach. Others believe the movement is intentional sabotage, a slow drift toward the unknowable that keeps the journey self-perpetuating and impossible to validate. And yet, every segment of the path is rich with story, with sacrifice. They say you can taste prayers in the air at some stations, that Vox units echo sermons not transmitted in millennia, that the walls of dead hive cities bleed ichor only when the devout pass by. Some shrines are built on the backs of titanic macro-beasts that wander orbital paths around irradiated suns, reachable only once every generation. Others are within derelict black ships that now serve as drifting confessionals, manned by blind astropaths who mutter the final cries of those consumed by the warp. The route is madness, a scaffold of collective delusion and deliberate suffering. But it is beautiful too, because in a galaxy where meaning is swallowed by void and horror, here is a journey defined by purpose. Every footstep is a hymn. Every scar is a verse. Every collapse into dust is part of the litany. Even the Imperium does not fully control the path anymore. Ecclesiarchs try to standardize it, to sanctify and catalog its infinite branches, but the faithful resist. To define it is to kill it. To map it is to ruin it. The pilgrimage has become more than just a reenactment of saintly suffering. It is a resistance against forgetting, a clawing grasp towards spiritual truth in a galaxy designed to crush it. And so the walkers continue, feet bleeding across ancient stone and warp-touched dust. They die nameless, disappear by the thousands, and still new generations rise to replace them. They are not seeking a place. They are seeking a pain that makes the galaxy make sense, a suffering that justifies survival. And in that pursuit, they become something more, or less, than human. They come from every wound the Imperium has ever failed to close. Hive rats with eyes burned out by chem sludge, once serfs of night worlds who watched their lords fall to madness, tech clerks who heard forbidden machine whispers in the dark. Some come for forgiveness, others come for punishment. A few come simply because they dreamed of a woman veiled in thorns who beckoned them toward an invisible flame. The pilgrims of the hollow map are not soldiers, not warriors. They are the broken, the lost, and the faithful, categories that often overlap so thoroughly they become indistinguishable. There is no uniform, no common tongue, no organized congregation. They are a tide of bodies, ever moving, ever dwindling, ever replaced. From all corners of Segmentum Pacificus and beyond, they find each other, or at least find the same shrines, the same ancient paths etched into forgotten orbital debris or last burnt stone. And they walk, and some do so in silence, taking the vow of the tongueless way, echoing Doarissa's final days. Others become wandering choirs, keening endless hymns of grief, their voices raw with blood. On plague moons, pilgrims paint their own faces with pus in mimicry of the saints' suffering. On airless dead worlds, they carve prayers into their own skin, knowing the vacuum will freeze them into permanence. They strip themselves of names, histories, and even identities, becoming vessels through which the idea of the saint may walk again. Entire generations are born on the journey. Children raised among the dust of ancient wrecks, suckling from emaciated mothers, taught not arithmetic or battle doctrine, but suffering. They learn to identify sacred relics by taste, to interpret the cries of dying pilgrims as signs, to see the Emperor's light not in triumph, but in the precise moment of collapse. For many of these wayborn souls, there is no galaxy outside the pilgrimage. To them, the Imperium is not a star empire. It is the winding agony between the stations of Dolar. Pilgrim caravans are strange beasts, formed of whatever survives. Shattered crawlers dragged by chains of penance slaves, rogue void ships patched with hulls from sainted derelicts, walking machines powered by the prayers of flagellants wired into their cores. They move slowly, always, no matter the medium. To rush is to miss the pain, and it is the pain that is sacred. Among the pilgrims are those who believe they have seen Dolar's end. They are marked, not visibly, not in a way anyone can catalog or confirm, but in their presence. These so-called returners are often silent, eyes permanently tear-streaked or hollow. Some claim they radiate a kind of spiritual gravity, bending the faith of others around them. Others accuse them of being corrupted, of carrying lies in the name of hope. Most are simply watched, by both the Ecclesiarchy and the Inquisition, but never publicly acknowledged. And still they come. From penal colonies where entire units are offered the pilgrimage as a form of execution. From hive worlds where cults of Doarissa outnumber administratum enforcers. From the broken bridges of void ships lost in warp tides, whose crew arrive years or centuries late, but continue walking as if no time passed at all. They walk for different reasons. Some seek healing, a cure for body or soul, often both. Others hope to disappear, to be consumed by something greater than themselves. A few crave the rumored vision at the journey's end, the the final dream of Doarissa, where she whispers the true name of the Emperor, a name so powerful it will unmake the galaxy and remake it in mercy. Most know this is just another lie, but it is a beautiful one. And in the Imperium of Man, where lies are often the only food left to eat, beauty is sustenance. These are the pilgrims of the hollow map. They have no destination, only motion, no promise, only prayer. And in every footstep, every bloodstain, every cracked vocal cord, they remake the galaxy, not in war, not in conquest, but in agony willingly chosen. That, in this empire of knives, might be the most radical act of all. There is a room in the Archivum Obscurus on Terra where no light has touched the shelves in 6 millennia. Dust floats in patterns resembling prayers, and the cogitators there hum with uncertainty, looping contradictory fragments like broken litanies. Somewhere in that room is a folder, a brittle leather-bound relic containing 57 different entries for Dolar's End. Each entry lists a different set of stellar coordinates. Each is marked confirmed. Each is also marked expunged. The file is signed by 3 different scribes who never existed. This is not unique. Across the Adeptus Administratum, conflicting records of the pilgrimage's final destination create a mosaic of bureaucratic madness. Some place Dolar's End near the Maelstrom, others in the Ghoul Stars, others still within a rogue planetary cluster that seems to move through the warp like a shark through blood. Anomalies are constant. System designations assigned to sectors destroyed centuries prior, planet names linked to no star, orbital patterns that make no astrophysical sense. In every case, the data is official, stamped, sanctified, and utterly unusable. Attempts to clarify have only deepened the mire. Over the centuries, dozens of explorator fleets have been dispatched to chart and confirm the true endpoint of the pilgrimage. Some vanish. Others return with reams of data that directly contradict each other. In one especially damning case, a fleet under Magos Tyranno Sigma Nullus found 4 different Dolar's End candidates. All planets devastated by unknown cataclysm, all bearing identical shrine structures down to the molecular wear patterns, all orbiting stars with the exact same spectral profile. The data was declared heretical and sealed under Inquisitorial lock. Administratum scholars have offered explanations that range from clerical error to warp interference. The more radical among them posit that the entire journey is predicated on a pre-apostasy schema meant to absorb rogue pilgrim populations into spiritually lucrative death spirals. That it was never about reaching a place, but about feeding a machine of belief that self-perpetuates through loss and contradiction. The path persists because it fails to be resolved. Others, particularly those within the Ordo Cognoscens, whisper of pattern recursion, that the path is a recursive event loop within the psychic echo chamber of the Imperium's collective unconscious. In other words, the more people believe in the pilgrimage, the more real it becomes, but always just out of reach, because its existence is tied to its unknowability. If it were ever found, it would die. Even cartographs from trusted navigator houses vary wildly. Star charts depicting the end of the pilgrimage are rendered in blood-red inks, accompanied by cryptic annotations. One famous chart, found aboard the derelict void ship Penance of Saints, shows a dot labeled Dolar's End, located at the heart of the Astronomicon itself, an impossibility that drove its interpreting scribe mad. Lesser known are the living maps, human archivists genetically altered to become repositories of coordinates and navigational hymns. Several of these so-called flesh cartographers were created by rogue Mechanicus sects to memorize every variant of the path. Each one, when interrogated, offers a different final answer, and each one dies screaming the same phrase: "She is the absence that walks." There are digital ghosts, too, fragments of vox logs, pict captures, and machine-etched hymns that reference Dolar's End using language incompatible with High Gothic or binary cant. Many involve repeating fractal geometries or backwards prayer chains. These files corrupt whatever databanks house them, spreading like viruses of unspeakable faith. Among the administratum, a heretical but quietly admired saying has emerged: truth is a sin. Only faithful contradiction may sanctify. Nowhere is this more evident than in the conflicting records of the pilgrimage's end. The system thrives on certainty, yet here lies an institutionally reinforced enigma, a place that breaks the imperial obsession with categorization. It is not that Dolor's end cannot be found. It is that it cannot be allowed to be found. Some believe the data inconsistencies are deliberate, that deep within the Imperium's memory-engineered foundations, certain paths are seeded with failure. That faith is not meant to be fulfilled, but to be pursued into the jaws of entropy, never touching resolution. And in this way, the pilgrimage is the purest act of imperial belief, a journey through the machine's madness that requires, above all else, the surrender of knowing. There is a moment at the end of many pilgrim hymns where the voices fall into a hush and a single line is whispered. Dolor's end is not where it is, but where it must be. That phrase, simple and maddening, encapsulates the existential wound that haunts the pilgrimage. The coordinates to the final station are known in theory. They are etched into reliquaries, whispered by dying confessors, encoded into the orbital decay of ancient satellites. The problem is not the absence of data, it is the overabundance of it. Every version of the endpoint is said to be correct. Every version contradicts the others. The ecclesiarchy maintains a sacred archive known as the Locus Vox, a vault of Vox sigils believed to carry the original coordinates spoken by Saint Doarissa herself in her final moment. It is locked behind wards only accessible to a rare few canoness signifiers who have spent their entire lives preparing to hear it. The last known attempt to access the Locus Vox resulted in spontaneous mass weeping across 6 hives on the planet Justicar Morn. The canoness involved simply fell to her knees and said, "It was here, and it was not." She has not spoken since. Another set of coordinates is passed through a cult that dwells in the asteroid temples of the Grail Belt. These coordinates lead to a star system whose sun is dead and whose planets are missing. Yet every few years, a warp anomaly flares at its center, pulsing with impossible gravity. Some believe it to be the ghost of a world, a psychic echo left by the sheer weight of belief that once existed there. Ships that attempt to breach the phenomenon return stripped of flesh, their crews nothing but bones arranged in prayer formation. There is also the infamous Mandeville Twist, a bizarre cartographic anomaly found in the fringes of Segmentum Obscurus. Pilgrims who follow its shifting spiral of warp routes find themselves circling the same empty system repeatedly. Each orbit changes them slightly, more than time should allow. Some gain stigmata. Others speak in languages unknown to their own kindred. A few disappear entirely, only to reappear centuries earlier in the records of other pilgrimages, embedded in pict feeds and data logs before they were even born. It is said that Dolor's End has a dozen names: Elorad Prime, Sorrow's Bastion, the Burning Cradle, Saint Fall, Ultima Lux, the Grave that Birthed Fire. Each is used by a different sect or variant of the cult surrounding the pilgrimage. Some names only appear in one document, others are scrawled in blood across the walls of battle-torn cathedrals. But they all share one feature. No two ever match the coordinates given. It is as though every name hides a different world, a different final truth. Or perhaps each name was meant to point to the same place, seen from different states of faith. The most chilling theory, however, does not come from the faithful, but from a rogue inquisitor whose name is scratched out in every record where it appears. According to a fragment found in a corrupted black data coffin, he claimed that Dolor's End is not a place, but a consequence, a point in space-time that only comes into existence when enough belief is focused into the void. That the path is a ritual, not a route. That the coordinates are not a location, but a summoning. This would explain the endless inconsistencies. Every pilgrim walking the path is part of a psychic equation, a living formula designed to rewrite a piece of the galaxy. Once the proper number of pilgrims have suffered, bled, died in the name of the saint, Dolor's end will manifest, not in real space, but in the heart of the faithful. A paradise or a punishment, a reward or a test. But something real, at least in that moment. And that is the cruel paradox of it all. The path demands devotion to a destination that may never exist until the belief itself gives it form. The pilgrims are walking into a lie, but the weight of their steps makes the lie true. And if they stop walking, if they ever doubt, the thing they seek will vanish like mist in solar wind. So the coordinates endure in holy scripts, heretical schematics, warp-born dreams, each one a thread in a tapestry woven from screams and whispers. And maybe, just maybe, one of them is real. Or maybe they all are, if you believe hard enough to make them so. The returners, as they're whispered of across shrine worlds and ecclesiarchal archives, are a scattered, inconsistent anomaly in an otherwise unfathomable ritual. They are the ones who come back. Not many, perhaps 1 in a billion, but enough to provoke fear, reverence, and, in some corners, execution. Their stories are fragmented, half told in tears, hallucinations, or tongues long since purged from the lexicon of High Gothic. Yet all carry one core certainty. Something happened. One man, a preacher known only as Voslira, walked barefoot for 30 years across 5 sectors. When he returned, he bore no eyes, no tongue, and no ears, all removed with surgical precision, yet the wounds healed clean. He could still speak somehow, his voice resonating in the minds of those nearby like a cathedral bell heard through water. "She waits," he said, over and over, until an Inquisitorial kill team reduced him to ash. A woman, Marnessa Callan of Sybaris Delta, emerged from a dust storm outside a shrine where no ship had landed for decades. Her skin was blackened as though burned from within, yet she wept golden tears that never ceased. She refused to describe what she had seen, not out of fear, but reverence. "You don't describe the Emperor," she told the confessor who recorded her final words. "You become him, or you don't return." Others are less coherent. There are dozens of returners who arrive screaming, flayed of identity, their minds a carousel of broken scripture and alien symbols. Some claim to have walked through cities built of silence. Others describe a field of statues, each one a perfect replica of a pilgrim, all facing a sun that doesn't rise. A few insist they saw Doarissa, not as a saint, but as something else, something older, something watching. In one disturbing case, a returner was found aboard a derelict pilgrim vessel adrift near the borders of the Halo stars. She had starved to death, but her body bore no decay. In her grip was a piece of parchment scrawled with a simple phrase: "We were inside her dream." No one could determine how the ink had survived in vacuum. The parchment, upon further analysis, was made of human skin. The ecclesiarchy publicly denies these stories. Returners, when mentioned at all, are labeled heretics or frauds, purged to protect the faith. Yet some cardinals collect their testimonies in secret. Among the Adepta Sororitas, certain orders pronatus hold relics said to be gifted by returners. Feather-like bones, unmelting wax, candles that burn with ice-cold flame. They do not speak of these artifacts openly, but they guard them with fervor. Even the Ordo Hereticus is divided. Some view returners as corrupted vectors of chaos, psychic constructs fashioned by warp entities to undermine imperial doctrine. Others argue that their presence is the most sacred form of truth, that only through annihilation of the self can one witness the divine. A rare few believe that the returners are the path's true purpose, not saints, not prophets, but warnings. It is perhaps the Inquisition's fear that most defines the truth of the returners. If these souls have seen Dolor's end, or something like it, then the very foundation of the pilgrimage becomes unstable. A myth is safe when distant, metaphorical, but a myth that walks back into your world, eyes alight with something beyond reason, that is dangerous. that cannot be catalogued. It must be silenced. And yet, the pilgrims know. They know the returners exist, even if they never meet one. Every step taken on the path is a whisper to them. Every bone left behind is a hope that someone, someday, might reach the end and tell them what lies beyond the veil. The returners are not messengers. They are scars, proof that something waits at the end. Not salvation, not damnation, but something. And in the Imperium of man, where certainty is a weapon and ignorance a shield, that is perhaps the most terrifying truth of all. The Inquisition's hand lies heavy over the path, not as a guide, but as a blade in the dark. The pilgrimage to Dolar's End, in all its fractured mystery and spiritual fervor, is too dangerous to ignore, and far too potent to fully erase. To the Ordo Hereticus, it is a heresy incubator. To the Ordo Malleus, a possible psychic ritual of demonic magnitude. To the Ordo Xenos, an anomaly that may mask alien influence. But beneath these layers of threat assessment is something colder, more calculating, fear of meaning that escapes control. The Inquisition does not forbid the pilgrimage outright. To do so would be to martyr the idea, to give it sharper edges. Instead, it fragments its response, deploying agents under 1,000 different guises. Interrogators pose as pilgrims, planting false relics. Astropaths lace visions with subtle misdirections. Ordos sow doubt within cults through confessionals designed not to redeem, but to unravel. And when the situation demands it, entire caravans vanish, not in warp storms or Xenos ambushes, but in surgical silence. Some Inquisitors embrace the path, walking it themselves to map the psychic terrain. These radical elements view the pilgrimage as a kind of test, both spiritual and mimetic. A mechanism to measure the warp's response to belief, concentrated in motion. These are the ones most likely to go rogue, to vanish into Dolar's wake and return changed, or not at all. Whispers speak of Inquisitors whose rosettes fuse to their chests, who now speak in liturgical equations, who leave flowers of flame wherever they pass. There is also the Black Archive of Ordinate Thelx, a sealed Inquisitorial repository on an orbital tomb station in the Lapse Expanse. According to rare redacted references, it holds hundreds of case files detailing psychological collapse among Inquisitors who studied the pilgrimage too long. These case files include hallucinations of a figure in barbed veils, auditory sermons in extinct dialects, and dreams of walking through mirrors made of screaming glass. Access to the archive requires unanimous approval from the Conclave of Iron Echo, and those who gain it are never the same again. Some agents operate in plain sight, adopting the guise of pilgrim watchers. These robed figures offer aid to the faithful, guiding them to safe paths or away from doomed detours. Many are genuine, but among them walk Inquisitorial operatives whose kindness is a mask, whose mission is to sterilize the path of any metaphysical contamination. They collect stories, confiscate relics, and eliminate returners before they speak. To these agents, faith is a wildfire. Beautiful, yes, but destined to consume unless trimmed by blade and silence. The Inquisition also fears what the pilgrimage might become. The belief network supporting it is immense, decentralized, and mutative. If organized, if directed, it could birth a new cultic structure powerful enough to rival even the Ministorum itself. Worse, if Dolar's End truly is a psychic construct, then every pilgrim may be part of a ritual far grander than the Imperium suspects. A ritual that could open a breach or reshape reality in accordance with faith twisted into resonance. Evidence exists, sealed under dread sigils, that certain pilgrimage convergence points have coincided with warp anomalies of unprecedented stability. These events bend causality, allowing for phenomena such as retroactive martyrdom, where a pilgrim dies in a shrine that didn't exist until after their death. The Inquisition monitors these sites obsessively, debating whether they are sanctified miracles or demonic tricks. No consensus is ever reached, only orders and purges. Then there is the greatest fear of all, that the pilgrimage is not a symptom of faith, but a message. That Doarissa was not a saint, but a vessel. That the entire path was laid down by an intelligence not bound to the warp or real space, but something in between. Something that speaks not in words, but in patterns of sacrifice. To follow the path, then, is not to seek the Emperor, but to respond to a call none of us were meant to hear. And so the Inquisition walks in shadow behind the pilgrims. It watches, it edits, it intervenes. Sometimes it protects, often it destroys. Always it waits, for the pattern to break, for the path to shift, for the moment when faith stops being harmless. Because deep in the vaults of their hidden conclaves, where even the light of the Astronomicon does not reach, they have begun to suspect the most terrifying possibility of all, that the pilgrimage is working. Within the iron cathedrals of the Adeptus Mechanicus, where prayers are equations and faith is measured in voltages, heresies wear different shapes. And among these hidden blasphemies lies one of the most haunting theories ever whispered, that the pilgrimage to Dolar's End is not a spiritual phenomenon at all, but a machine, ancient, elegant, and utterly monstrous. A construct designed not to sanctify, but to calculate, not to save, but to map. This theory, called the heretic hypothesis, is regarded even within radical circles as dangerous. It originates from data fragments traced back to a now-purged sect of the Logicae Reclaimers, a splinter of tech priests obsessed with the concept of mimetic geography, the idea that belief itself can shape reality, and that faith can be weaponized as a tool of stellar engineering. According to their theories, the path to Dolar's End is a psychic lattice, a galactic circuit built not of copper or fiber, but of human suffering. At the heart of this theory lies the concept of Dolar points, psychic nodes activated by mass emotional resonance. Each station on the pilgrimage is a calculated position, chosen not for spiritual value, but for its capacity to absorb and transmit pain. Pilgrims act as signal amplifiers, their agony not wasted but transformed into data, spiritual telemetry, feeding some vast machine that exists not in real space or warp, but in the interface between them. Every scream a pulse, every death a calibration. If true, this would reframe the entire ecclesiarchal narrative. St. Doarissa would not be a martyr, but an input, the prototype signal used to bootstrap the network. Her journey wasn't one of penance, but initiation, and the stations were never meant as places of worship. They were anchors, strategically placed to maintain resonance across the Imperium. The final destination, Dolar's End, would be the machine's central node, a place not of arrival, but of completion. The end of the equation. Heretics who believe this theory, often hunted and exterminated without trial, describe the path as a probability engine. They claim the pilgrimage is shaping not just belief, but causality itself. That the Imperium, in its blind worship, is constructing a device that will allow the Mechanicum, or perhaps some deeper intelligence, to rewrite the laws of chance and fate. Imagine an empire that no longer relies on strategy, logistics, or even warfare. Just certainty, enforced by suffering. Victory, guaranteed by math sanctified in blood. More disturbing still are reports of ancient Mechanicus vaults containing relics tied to the pilgrimage long before Doarissa's canonization. Circuit steles inscribed with her image found buried under Martian dunes. Star maps listing Dolar's End centuries before the saint's birth. Dedicrypts encoding the liturgies of the path using encryption keys dated to the dark age of technology. It suggests the possibility that the pilgrimage was not discovered, but unlocked, a sleeper program within the very structure of the galaxy waiting to be awakened. Skeptics within the Mechanicus, particularly those loyal to Mars proper, deny the theory vehemently. They label it digital mysticism, corrupted code theology, or simply nonsense. But their denials are increasingly undercut by disappearances. Archmagi investigating pilgrimage anomalies have vanished mid-transmission. Forge worlds near major stations report strange tech malfunctions, devices that behave as if haunted, machine spirits that demand penance. There is also the troubling case of the Omnis archive aboard the lost Arc Mechanicus Endless Schema. According to a fragmentary distress call received in binary chant, the ship had begun to see the path, not on screens but in its own internal sensorium. Its machine spirit grew obsessed, altering course to follow invisible coordinates, refusing override. The last message: it is not a pilgrimage, it is a blueprint. And so, the heretic theory festers, half belief, half warning, that the pilgrimage is not a sacred tradition, but a test protocol, that the faithful are not saints, but components, that Dolor's End is not the cradle of redemption, but the trigger for something vast, ancient, and inhuman. If this is true, then every footstep taken in faith is not a path to salvation, but a boot stamping a circuit into reality, one scar at a time. In the darkness between stars, where the warp brushes closest to real space and the veil grows thin, the path to Dolor's End begins to bleed. Not blood, but meaning. Not essence, but echoes. Whispers that shiver through the thoughts of astropaths, that coil around the minds of navigators like unseen chains. Whispers that do not come from within, nor from the Emperor, but from something else. Something watching. These are not hallucinations. They are too structured, too persistent. They speak in fractured liturgies, reverse prayers, dream geometry rendered in language that decays upon transcription. Pilgrims describe hearing the words before they are spoken. Some see glyphs in the warp that resemble the stations of the path. Others report the appearance of a veiled woman etched into their auspex screens, her gaze erasing code in patterns only decipherable to sanctioned psychers. And then there are the storms. Warp storms, yes. Real, catalogued, massive events of chaos and unreality. But some are different. They are smaller, more precise, directed. Warp pulses that flare at specific stations on the path, only during mass pilgrimages, and only when enough suffering has accumulated. These flares do not follow known patterns. They twist the very nature of presence. Ships inside them find their Geller field stable, but reality itself shifts. Time loops. Identity frays. On one occasion, a pilgrim ship emerged from such a flare with an additional deck. No one built it. No one entered it. But it was there, filled with statues of the crew carved from salt. Some Inquisitorial Lex mechanics have begun referring to these anomalies as Dolor nodes, points where the warp seems to bend not with rage, as is common in Chaos Taint, but with grief. It's a concept nearly unknown in the lexicon of the warp, where emotion normally translates to violent, instinctive madness. Yet here is sadness, raw, solemn, persistent. The warp mourns. And whatever lies behind these tears, it remembers the pilgrims. The demonic interpretations are perhaps the most disturbing. There exist unconfirmed reports of entities encountered along the path that do not match known chaos archetypes. Not demons of Khorne or Tzeentch, not even the unfathomable shapes of the deep warp, but new things. Sad things. Creatures that do not scream, but beg. That bleed light. That ask the pilgrims why they keep walking. These beings do not attack. They observe. They vanish when named. Certain demon hunters theorize these are reflections, proto-entities birthed not from desire, rage, or excess, but from repetition, from sacred suffering repeated until it takes psychic form. They are not demons in the traditional sense, but emergent warp echoes of the pilgrimage itself. Echoes that grow stronger as the path persists. Echoes that may, in time, become gods of sorrow. Or perhaps they already are, embryonic faith entities awaiting enough worship to rise. Among the navigators, there is growing dread. Houses refuse to chart the deeper ends of the pilgrimage. They speak of the folding star, a psychic scar in the warp that seems to respond to prayers with laughter. Ships navigating near this region experience reversals, Moments where cause and effect swap, where engines roar before activation, where screams precede injury. A voyage toward Dolar's End becomes a meditation in reverse entropy. The warp is not resisting the pilgrimage, it is listening. And then there are the rarest accounts, whispered by mad confessors, scrawled on walls in forbidding convents, carved into the bones of martyrs. These claim that Doarissa was not merely a saint who walked into darkness, but a lure. That she heard the first whisper and followed it willingly. That the path is not just a reenactment of her suffering, but the continuation of her descent into something vast and sorrowful beyond understanding. That each pilgrim is another verse in a hymn designed to open a wound in the soul of the warp itself. There are no direct confirmations, no solid evidence, just patterns, recurring dreams, psychic echoes, weeping icons, saint statues that bleed only when touched by blind children. But in a galaxy ruled by faith, where the line between reality and belief is always blurred, such signs are more than enough. Something in the warp knows the path, something ancient, something grieving. And as the pilgrims walk, it listens, it learns, and it waits. At the heart of every imperial shrine, every cathedral, every whispered catechism uttered in the depths of despair, lies the presence of the Emperor. He is the light in the dark, the voice in the silence, the warmth in the cold of a galaxy that has forgotten mercy. But at the end of the pilgrimage, or rather where the end should be, there is no presence, no revelation, no divine signal in the soul of the faithful, only emptiness. This is not a silence born of distance. It is not the absence felt when a planet lies too far from the Astronomicon to feel its guiding pulse. This is something deeper, more personal. Pilgrims report that as they near the supposed end of the path, wherever that may be, their visions fade. The dreams stop. The statues go still. The feeling of being watched by something loving, or at least judging, evaporates. The warmth of the Emperor's distant gaze becomes a void colder than the void outside. For many, this absence is the final trial. They interpret it as a test of unflinching devotion, to believe even when belief is not rewarded, to keep walking when the road dissolves beneath their feet. But others break. Their faith shatters not with thunder, but with silence. Some collapse weeping. Others become still as statues, staring at nothing, as if trying to hear a voice that will not return. A few whisper that this is the true revelation, that the Emperor is not absent. He was never there. Among the ecclesiarchy, this heresy is called the Hollow Heresy. It is punished by death, obliteration, memory expungement. And yet it persists, because the silence at the end is not a metaphor. It is real, tangible, felt in the marrow of the soul. Confessors who have walked the path and returned, sanctioned or otherwise, speak of a sensation best described as unbeing, as if they had come to the final shrine expecting a mirror of the Emperor's divinity, and instead found only the echo of their own voice asking again and again, "Why did I come here?" The echo does not answer. It just stretches endlessly. This absence is different from the lies of chaos or the mutterings of Xenos gods. It is not active deception. It is not trickery. It is the void made manifest, not as destruction, but as negation. And it forces pilgrims to confront a truth that no one in the Imperium is prepared to face, that faith without reciprocation is indistinguishable from madness, that the divine without presence is indistinguishable from delusion. And yet, they continue. The absence does not end the pilgrimage, it becomes it. It is a faith evolved into something crueler, purer, belief that does not need validation, worship that expects nothing, a form of devotion where the absence itself is sacred, where the silence at the end of all things is interpreted not as failure, but as proof that the Emperor is so vast, so unknowable, so beyond mortal comprehension, that his most blessed form is not being there, that to stand in his light would burn the soul to ash, that his absence is the gift. This idea terrifies the Ministorum, because it means faith can survive anything, even the death of the god it worships. Some theologians, excommunicated, erased, feared, have speculated that this is the true nature of the path, that Doarissa saw not the Emperor, but this absence, that her silence was not veneration, but horror, that her sacrifice was not to emulate him, but to warn us. And the pilgrimage, then, is not a reenactment of sainthood, but a mimicry of despair repeated until it becomes sacred. Others go further. They say the Emperor knows what lies at the end of the path, that he himself carved the route, not to guide humanity, but to keep it walking away from a truth too terrible to bear, that the pilgrimage is not a journey toward the Emperor, but a decoy, a spiritual misdirection to keep the faithful from turning their eyes toward the real horror, the real absence. But still they walk, not because they expect to find him, not because they expect reward, but because in walking, in bleeding, in suffering, they give shape to a world where something like meaning can exist, even if that meaning is empty. And in that emptiness, they find their God, or something close enough to endure. The tale of the pilgrimage, though rooted in a vanishing trail and a destination that refuses to exist, spreads like holy rot through the Imperium. It infects not just the faithful, but the void between systems, the silences in sermons, the gaps in official doctrine where meaning leaks through. Though Dolar's end may lie beyond the reach of navigation, its shadow falls across every corner of the Imperium, in song, in relic, in whispered heresy turned liturgy by repetition. On shrine worlds, choirs sing hymns that were never written. Their lyrics arrive in dreams or are found etched into the stone of pilgrim bones buried beneath the altar. These songs do not speak of the Emperor's triumph, but of the long walk through silence, of a saint who never answered prayer, but endured them. Ecclesiarchal authorities try to ban them, but the melodies always return. Children hum them without knowing why. Artisans across the Segmentum Pacificus have begun to carve icons of a veiled woman standing at the edge of a broken star. No one commissions these works. They simply appear, on cathedral arches, on the sides of freighters, etched into the backs of hive-gangers with no memory of how they got there. Her posture varies, but her face is always hidden. Some say it is Doarissa. Others say it is the end of the path itself, given form through longing. Even among the Adeptus Astartes, echoes of the path have taken root. Certain warrior chaplains of the Black Templars speak in hushed tones of the long silence, a rite of passage where a space marine ventures into uncharted space guided only by pain recognition algorithms adapted from pilgrimage records. They return altered, no longer speaking of glory or honor, but of perseverance against an uncaring void. The practice is not officially recognized, but it persists. The relic trade has exploded in the wake of the path's resurgence. Fragments of supposed stations are bought and sold across the Imperium. Bones marked with Doarissa's supposed seal, cracked voxcasters that replay the same weeping hymn, cloaks woven from synthetic fibers said to have been dipped in the ashes of vanished shrines. Some are fakes, many are heretical, but a few carry something more, not power exactly, but presence, a heaviness, as if they remember being mourned. And then there are the outlaw cults, those who have taken the myth and twisted it into doctrine. The scalded saints of Pyrrhus Ficht wear molten iron masks to honor the face of Doarissa, they say, was never meant to be seen. The pathwalkers of Desmir III tattoo maps of imaginary stations across their flesh, bleeding new waypoints into being with every step. The chorus of hollow light walks entire hive cities, singing the names of every pilgrim who vanished, a living record of absence that sometimes causes psychers nearby to scream and collapse. The Administratum, unable to stem the flow of these stories, has begun quietly updating its records to include pilgrim class anomalies, cartographic distortions, population fluctuations, unexplained relic proliferation. They do not explain these entries. They simply file them away under layer upon layer of sigils meant to ward off curiosity, as if acknowledging the myth gives it weight, as if believing it might make it real, and perhaps it already is. The myth has become self-sustaining, a mimetic engine of faith, trauma, and repetition. It no longer requires confirmation or even participants. It has entered the cultural bloodstream of the Imperium. In plays performed on Forge worlds, the saint walks a burning bridge into darkness. In prison cells, her name is carved into walls in scripts that haven't been taught for centuries. In death chants of distant void fleets, her final words are sung backwards to ensure safe passage. Even non-humans have noticed. Eldar Farseers have seen veils in their skein readings, shapes that resemble Doarissa walking backward through time. Eldari of Ulthwé speak of the grieving star, a human myth they cannot unsee once heard. Some orc weirdboys have spontaneously screamed, "She comes," before detonating in halos of fire. No one knows why. The pilgrimage may be a lie, Dola's end may be nothing, but the story is not. It is a contagion of meaning, a virus of devotion, a legend that cannot be killed, because every attempt to suppress it becomes another verse in its litany. And in the endless dark, sometimes a myth is all that keeps the flame alive. They say the pilgrimage changes you, not just in the flesh, where scar upon scar becomes a map of suffering, but in the soul, or whatever part of a person still clings to meaning in this galaxy of ghosts. They say the path leads nowhere, that the destination is a lie, but those who have truly walked it, those who have given up everything, name, purpose, fear, they understand the final truth. The path is not meant to be walked. It is meant to walk you. The longer one travels the pilgrimage, the more reality begins to misalign. The stations lose linearity. Time folds. Suffering echoes forward and back. Pilgrims begin to see themselves in places they haven't yet reached. They dream of shrines they've not yet visited, only to arrive and find their own prayers already etched in the stone. Some report speaking with future versions of themselves, broken and radiant, whispering secrets they immediately forget. One chronicler described it as walking inside a cathedral made of your own choices. Dolar's End, if it exists at all, is not a planet. It is the moment where the boundary between self and suffering collapses, where the pilgrim ceases to be a traveler and becomes a part of the pilgrimage itself, where their footsteps no longer follow the path. Their footsteps are the path. Every sacrifice another brick in a road made of agony and yearning. The ecclesiarchy, in its most esoteric circles, has begun to hint at a hidden doctrine called the doctrine of the becoming. It states that the true purpose of the pilgrimage is not to reach a place, but to create a condition, a metaphysical crucible in which the faithful are refined into something new. Not saints, not martyrs, but tools, interfaces for something vast, perhaps divine, perhaps dead. Pilgrims who complete the walk are not rewarded. They are transformed, rewritten, used. And the most terrifying part, they welcome it. Because by the time one reaches the final stretch, the last steps where no stars shine and no prayers echo back, the notion of self is a memory. The pilgrim has become so accustomed to absence, to pain, to silence, that identity feels like a burden. And in shedding it, they become the path, a new station, a new tale, a new verse in the song that writes itself. It is said that on some worlds touched by the path, the soil hums with quiet hymns, that the wind speaks names that have never been recorded, that children born nearby bear veiled faces and speak in liturgies before they learn speech. These anomalies are dismissed by official authorities, but the locals know. They know the pilgrimage passed through, and that part of it never left. This is the final truth, not that the destination is unreachable or that it never existed, but that reaching it means ceasing to be, that every pilgrim who arrives does so by becoming an extension of the myth. They vanish, not because they are lost, but because they are absorbed. Their pain becomes the liturgy, their bones the path, their longing the signpost for the next generation. And perhaps that was always the point. In a galaxy built on war, where gods scream and worlds burn, to suffer in silence, to choose agony without promise, is a form of resistance, a refusal to play the game of conquest and glory. The pilgrimage is not a path to power. It is a surrender to meaninglessness that, through repetition, becomes meaningful, a self-consuming fire that leaves behind not ashes but shape. The path walks you. It carves you into something that does not need answers. Only motion, only memory, only faith etched in footsteps across a road that was never there. And so the pilgrims march, and the path grows longer, and the galaxy watches and wonders if it too is being walked. Thank you for joining this journey through the darkest corridors of Imperial faith and illusion. If you found this tale compelling, subscribe for more grimdark legends and speculative depths from the Warhammer 40K universe. The path continues, and so do we.